Hi everyone, and welcome to this UCL Connect event, Demystifying Consultancy. My name is Andy Stirrups and I work in the alumni relations team at UCL. Many thanks for joining this virtual event today. For many of you, you may have joined this call because you have a burning question right now, which is what exactly is consultancy? From joining a grad scheme at a Big Four company to becoming a self-employed consultant with your own business, there are a number of ways you can gain employment in this sector. And we've got a great lineup of 4 UCL alumni at this event today, who are each going to be representing their own different area of consultancy. And they're going to be sharing more about what they do and how to break into their sector. For those of you who don't know about the UCL Connect program, this event is part of a series which looks at improving the professional development skills and expertise of alumni and students across the global UCL community. So whether you're establishing your career, moving into a new industry, or considering your options post-graduation, the UCL Connect series has something for everyone. The program is a mix of virtual and in-person events, and we look to run something once a month. On the slides now, you should be able to see some of the previous sessions we have run. If you do wish to watch any of these sessions, please do follow the URL, which is listed on the screen right now. Before we begin today's event, I just want to let everyone know that this event is being recorded. Please, could you also ensure your microphones are on mute? There is an opportunity to ask questions to the panel today. And you can do this by writing your questions in the Q&A chat box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the session, and those questions which get upvoted by everyone on the call will be answered first. We do only have an hour for today's session, so if your question doesn't get answered by the panel today, then we'll be sure to send follow-up answers to your questions after the event. Up on the screen is what you can expect from today's session. So after some introductions from the panel, they'll dive straight into the discussion, looking at things such as how to recognize your transferable skills when transitioning into consultancy, what a typical day looks like for them as a consultant, and what each of their career paths looks like. So I'm delighted to introduce this stellar panel of alumni who are working in consultancy. All of them graduated within the last 4 years from UCL, so it wasn't that long ago that they were studying at the university. And we're delighted to have them back here with us today. I'd now like to hand over to our panel chair, Penny Longman, who works in the UCL Careers team and has wonderfully stepped in to chair today's panel as our previous panel chair, Agne, is unwell today, but Penny has taken the session and she will be leading today's discussion. So Penny, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, as Andy says, I'm a member of UCL Careers. I'm a senior careers consultant within the team, working with students across the university. And I'm looking forward, as much as you, to hearing from the panelists about both their career path to date, what they do, but also how we can really unpack that word of consultancy, which can be used in different settings to mean different things, which can get a bit confusing. So I will start by asking each panelist just to introduce themselves briefly, say a little tiny bit about who you are, what you do. I know that there was you were there on the screen a minute ago, and participants have been able to read a little bit, but if you could just say who you are, what you do, what you studied at UCL, and a tiny introduction to yourself, and then we'll go into some deeper questions after that. I'm going to go in the alphabetical order of your surnames, for want of a better way of doing this. So Aziza, can I start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Penny. So my name is Aziza. I actually studied at UCL at the Institute of Child Health quite some time ago. I think I graduated like 2018 or 2019, so I'm kind of old. And back then I studied biochemistry. I was mainly interested in developing therapies for drug-resistant epilepsy. And then once I finished my PhD, I had sort of that umming and ahhing period where I was sort of torn between going down the academic route, looking into like postdocs and stuff, or leaving academia entirely and going into industry. So that's when I eventually landed at Life Science Dynamics. So at Life Science Dynamics, I'm a consultant now. I started off as a business analyst and I've sort of worked my way up through the ranks. And basically at Life Science Dynamics, we do a whole host of different projects. We work mainly with big pharma and biotech companies, so it's all within the life science space, if the name didn't give that away. And essentially what we do is we provide different strategic insights and decision support to help our clients make their strategic decision making. So it really depends on what they're looking for. We help them across the pipeline, so from preclinical development all the way up to commercial stage assets. And we do that across various different practice areas. So I won't bore you too much. I'll hand it back to Penny, but I'm looking forward to chatting to everyone today.
Thank you. So a great example of somebody who's taken their subject specialism and carried that on, but within the world of consulting. And if I've got my alphabet right, Katherine, can we go to you next?
Hello, thank you. I'm Katherine O'Neil. Thanks for having me today. I graduated from UCL from the Bartlett School of Planning in Urban Design and City Planning in 2019. I'm from Minneapolis originally with a background in housing and community development. I used to work for nonprofits such as Urban Land Institute and Habitat for Humanity, and moved into consulting and starting my own LLC, which now I have a business called Built Fully, which is about beautiful built environments to make better places for all through content, community, and consultations. And so I really focus on, for example, I work with Beverly Main Streets and I do community events and planning initiatives with them. So I've had a variety of different projects over the years, a lot around renovating and designing public space and doing programming for different events and things like that. And so I also am on committees, and I used to be the board president of the Goldstein Museum of Design at the University of Minnesota. So always try to volunteer. And then I'm artist on the side. So I do photography and writing. So the part I love about consulting is you can get to do a little bit of everything in the field.
Thank you. And again, keeping your specialism as you go into the consultancy world. Lucas, can we go to you next?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm currently a junior consultant at BCG. Studied econ back in 2015 to 2018, and tried out everything I was really curious about. So from research and politics to like internships in like consulting or finance. Tried out everything, then ended up working for a German boutique consulting firm that specialized in financial services, worked on innovation strategy, developing new business models and digitalization cases, before I continued my studies at Frankfurt School in Finance, went for a semester abroad to Boston, and then went to the city's namesake, the Boston Consulting Group, and now tackle a broader range of topics in different industries. But yeah, personally, I like kite surfing or volleyball. So if you're ever around at Frankfurt, drop me a line. Yeah, happy to be here today.
Thank you very much. And obviously, Boston Consulting Group is one of the big names, and many students aspire to work there. So I'm sure they're going to be very glad to hear from you too. Umesh, can we go to you now?
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Umesh. I graduated in 2018. I did MSc Management following the finance pathway at UCL. Post-graduation, got unemployed for a bit. Finding a grad job isn't the easiest thing. I got through a lot of stages to get through. But I ended up actually at a fintech, not in the world of consulting, where I was a relationship executive, dealing with like a portfolio of about 70 clients and, developing my sort of stakeholder management skills. Post that, joined PwC on the grad scheme, and I was there for a year and a half, sort of kind of really understanding the world of consulting and all the different sectors and the ranges of work you can kind of do. And then post that, I left and I joined a boutique called BCS Consulting, who I'm with currently, but we were acquired by Accenture last year now in October. So now we're BCS Consulting, part of Accenture. So that's a whole new world of exploration at this point. But yeah, glad to be here and lots to talk about today.
Thank you. So you'll be able to bring insights from the boutique and the larger organization as well. That's really helpful. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions that try and get to the bottom of, well, why consultancy? And perhaps I can start with you, Umesh, on the why was it consultancy that you wanted to and did get into?
So consulting really wasn't on my radar when I was at uni. So when I was doing my undergrad, I was doing financial economics with my undergraduate, and I was kind of going towards sort of banking, private wealth management, but people was kind of what I was interested in. And then towards sort of my final year at the University of Leicester, and then in my master at UCL, I found out about the world of consulting, and that's when I realized that it was kind of two things. One is people. I think you get to work with a whole range of people, both externally and internally as well as a whole, there's a whole great minds around. I think that's one thing. And the second aspect for me was like the range of work, because you can be doing work in the private field, you can do work in the public sector or in the financial service sector, as I am. But even within those sectors itself, there's a whole variety of work. And for me, I'm still sort of, finding my way. I've specialized into the financial services field, but haven't specialized further, and there's so much you can do. For example, fin crime stuff, you can do operation resilience, you can do tech, data, and it just goes on and on. So that's kind of the two, really, the people and the range of work, I'd say.
Thank you. And Katherine, you hinted at one or two things that you feel to be a great advantage of consultancy. Were those things you were looking for? What was it that prompted you to move in this direction?
Yeah, after working for a couple nonprofits, as I said, I really wanted more flexibility and being able to go on my own and be able to choose more of my projects and contracts. So that's when I started my LLC, and I felt like I was able to kind of have more of a say and more creativity. And like I've said before, I've moved for a few places, and now I'm in Boston also. And so being able to have that flexibility where you can move around and be able to work in more of a local and international setting. And I also just really enjoyed working with a variety of different people and communities. And so being able to evolve and ever growing and be able to kind of mix it up once in a while is like a really positive aspect of consultancy.
So people and variety are coming through as very strong factors here from both of you. Aziza, perhaps Lucas, I can come to you about your motivations for going into consultancy.
Well, as consultants always structure things into 3 buckets. I'll start with my, I think first thing was kind of, I wanted to have a fast-paced environment. And I think you can have that in several settings, so that's not unique to consulting. But in consulting, and that's the second bucket, it's kind of, you get to do, as the other said, get to do a lot of different things. And especially now, and as Umesh said, like you can try out different industries, but not only industries, you can try out different functions. And then from there on, if you have no clue what you want to do, you can slowly start to figure out where you want to end up going. And then thirdly, and that I think stands out for me, especially at least for consulting, is that you get to deal with a lot of very cool people that you like to work around a lot. They have diverse sets of interests. You're alone a lot because everyone's doing different stuff. And you really do solve problems in a joint fashion. So there's a lot of teamwork. And I really like that component of consulting.
Thank you. So the variety is really shining out, and the people also a lot. Yes, that problem solving, that working together, all of those things that students, current students listening to this call might identify as, yes, that is something that appeals to me, that's sort of direction I want to go. And graduates listening to the call, alumni who are perhaps considering a move into consultancy, hopefully that is helpful too. Aziza, I'm going to come to you and talk a little bit, or ask you a little bit about moving into consultancy and your transferable skills. We talk in careers a lot about transferable skills, we identify those skills with students and try and help them to present their skills from maybe a different setting into whatever they want to go to. Can you tell me a bit about how you recognized that you had transferable skills that would apply to consultancy when moving into that area?
Thanks, Penny. So I think actually it's quite a natural transition, at least from my perspective, from going into from a PhD into a consulting background. But I think regardless of that, irrespective of what kind of degree you might follow or might be completing, I think the transition into consulting really focuses on like two critical things. Besides common sense, it's critical thinking and problem solving, which I think Lucas already mentioned. And these are things that you're going to hone throughout the course of your degree. You know, you're going to end up, sort of honing these skills if you do any extensive research projects, through the type of course you might do. You know, you learn to think outside the box, and that's what we really look for in a consulting firm. People who can think creatively and critically about the information that they're dealing with, and how to then translate that into insights that are useful for the clients. But then there are other soft skills that we have that I think you naturally pick up throughout the course of your studies. So things like communicating, presentation skills, writing as well. I mean, after doing extensive number of research papers, or if you're doing a thesis, for example, at some point you're gonna get better at that writing, and that's something that's quite important in consulting space. So I think we all have all these different soft skills. It's just knowing how to translate them into this career path. So just have to take a little step back and then just recognize, okay, what can I do? It's not always about the specific subject matter knowledge, but what else have you learned from your degree that can be useful irrespective of the career path you take? Because it's not just consulting that values these sorts of skill sets.
Thank you. And Umesh, you said that consulting hadn't previously been very much on your radar as being the thing that you wanted to do. Do you have anything to add there about how you recognized that your skills were ones that would work for going into consultancy?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I kind of back to the people point where I really enjoyed working with people. And so I realized that would be kind of, what these were saying, kind of communication skills, presentation skills, stakeholder management. Those are skills that you can pick up in a lot of jobs. Hence, I took that first role at a fintech where I was a relationship executive, and those were the skills I picked up. I think with consulting, soft skills potentially are one of the key elements going in, because all of the other skills, it's something you can always learn, and people are always learning continuously. Things like, Excel, PowerPoint, which is, it's bread and butter of consultants, I'd say, but it's something you can develop as you get there. And in industry knowledge, everyone's always learning. You can be doing, like I did a FinCrime project for the first time, didn't really know much, bit of Googling, getting there, and kind of just learning as you go. And that's kind of how people learn, because not everyone knows everything. So that's it, really just focus on the soft skills. And then kind of any job you take on, even if it's not consultancy as the first one, you can really pick up those skills and just hone them and then go from there. And I think UCL also does a lot of, because my master's, for example, we did a lot of presentations, like business cases and things like that. And those types of skills really do help, especially when it comes to, assessment centers and things like that. Those skills can really play a part.
Thanks. Yes, they really can. And Katherine, I was wondering, having worked in NGOs where you might be using the same skills, but you might describe them with different words because every industry has its own kind of terminology, its own jargon. Can you say something about how you were able to present those transferable skills that you knew you had that would fit consultancy, how you've been able to almost translate them into the language of consultancy?
Yeah, definitely. In the nonprofit world, a lot about is about advocacy and fundraising. And so being able to constantly sell yourself and being able to then, when you need to in consultancy, get your own clients or more business or funding for those projects, you have those skills that you learned before. I would also say that a lot of times you have a smaller team, and so you have to become like a jack of all trades. And so you need to have a variety of skills, like the others have said. And so learning how to kind of do a little of everything from events to design to computer programs to office management, and continuing to be a good project manager and being able to do time management and stay motivated are really important skills that you learn in that setting, and then you can apply to your own consultancy. I also think UCL was really good at teaching critical thinking also that we've heard. And so being able to really think and problem solve and get creative are really, really important, as we've heard before. And communication is key. So learning to work with others, which in every type of business, I believe we have to work as a team and we have to be able to work on our own. And so being able to do both is really, really important.
Thank you. So we're getting quite a picture here. I hope everyone's getting quite a picture of that flexibility, that varied day, presentations, working with clients, building relationships, working in teams. I wonder if we could now think a little bit about what a typical day might look like, even though we've just said you're doing lots of different things, so maybe there is no typical, but maybe a day or a week. Lucas, what would you say your day actually kind of consists of?
Yeah, tough question, because as you said, especially now after COVID, there's even less so of a typical day. Maybe back in the day, it was kind of, well, you go to the client from Monday to Thursday and then come back, and then now it's kind of all varied. Maybe you work from the home office for the whole period, or you just go to the client side on special days. For me, it's now more usual to go on like Tuesday to Thursday, and then you just have Mondays and Fridays in your home city where you live, or in which office you're from. And there, it really depends where you, if you're in your home office space, you maybe can go to the gym in the morning or in the evening, whereas it's much harder to do that when you're in a different city and you kind of have to accommodate to the circumstances around you. But it usually kicks off with, you kind of have a check-in with your team in the morning, kind of prioritize which things you're doing during the day, and then have like smaller sessions of your own analysis, or you work in or present it to a team or discuss your findings in a team and your next steps. And then as the day progresses, you then have a checkout in the end where you kind of discuss, okay, what's next? What's the key takeaways I got from today, and what do I have to do with that for tomorrow or the next week and so forth. So that's kind of how it's structured for me. And then around that, like it's all around kind of your own analysis, group discussions, and presentations to your clients, I would say.
So I'm getting a picture here that you're doing quite a bit of traveling, which doesn't surprise me. So a certain amount, particularly midweek, of being somewhere other than the home office. And when I say home office, I don't mean the UK home office, I mean your office at home. So, and then, so that's an extra element to your week. Aziza, you're in a different kind of consulting situation. Can you say a little bit about your day and maybe your week?
So, as you said, there isn't really a typical day, but it is quite different, I think, to a management consultant in that, so our projects vary a lot by length. So we tend to have a range of long-term annual projects or short-term sort of 2-3 month deep dive projects. But the majority of my projects tend to be long-term. So we don't really have the luxury of being able to go see our clients because they're all over the world. We've got clients in the US, got clients in Switzerland, in Japan. So I think traveling every single day of the week might be a bit tricky there. But what we tend to do is our responsibilities vary depending on your role. So at my level as a consultant, most of my responsibility is focused on project management. So that would mean I'll be involved in the internal and external project management. I'll be engaging with clients. We have usually like weekly or bi-weekly catch-ups with them. And then we'll discuss sort of what their priorities are, what their concerns are, or we'll share any sort of key findings. The good thing about that is you end up establishing a really like positive relationship. It's a long-term relationship with these people. It's not, you won't see them for a few weeks and that's it, goodbye. Like I've been working with these people for a good, what is it now, October, 10 months now, since January. So you get to know them quite well. But then we also have our own internal activities that we do. So those will be related to either the project or to the company. In terms of project work, it might be things like monthly reports, quarterly reports. We do something called alerts. And that's something very specific to one of our practice areas, which is called competitive intelligence. And essentially, competitive intelligence is us providing information from both secondary and primary sources to our clients based on their competitive landscape. So, i.e., what are their competitors in X therapy area doing, and how does that translate or potentially impact what our clients are doing within their space? So it is quite hands-on. I do a lot of the QCing, and then the analyst team. So my teams will usually range between sort of about 3 and 5 people in size. They'll be a bit more hands-on with the actual, like generating the research, putting together the reports. I've done all of that. I've done my grind. Now I'm sort of more overseeing the sort of the work streams themselves. So I still get to have a lot of input in how the work might look like and what the final outputs are. And I'll usually be the final point of contact before I reach out to my clients. So that's mainly what we do. We work remotely actually at Life Science Dynamic at the moment. We are planning to switch to a hybrid model, and I think a lot of the boutique firms are sort of in that sort of hybrid phase at the moment. But in terms of traveling, most of that traveling tends to be to conferences rather than to clients. So we do a lot of different conferences. They'll be very specific to each project. So for example, if you're doing an oncology project, you'll probably go to some of the bigger oncology conferences like ASCO, which is in Chicago every year. It's a massive conference. It's like 40,000 people who go there. So it's COVID central. But it is really, it's really interesting going to these places. You get to talk to lots of people. You talk to different KOLs or, doctors, physicians who are working, at the highest end of their field. Lots of cutting edge research. And then we also do primary research there. And that's when we try to extract information that they wouldn't necessarily say in public about what they're doing. So there's lots of different work streams that we do. So I'm not really sure if I described a day. It's kind of more like the year. But yeah, that's kind of what we do at Life Science. So it is very different to management consulting.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And you've mentioned a few things that are really useful to pick out. The different roles. There isn't a single role within consultancy, even within one type of consultancy, one type of firm. You have got the people who are doing more of the crunching the data. You've got someone like you who's project managing and overseeing, and you've got the client relationships to build that everybody needs to be very responsive to clients because that's the work. Mm-hmm. But some people are more having the direct relationship and some people are a little bit more behind the scenes with that data side of things. But you've also used the word research, which so many people, and perhaps particularly people doing further degrees like PhDs, wanting still to use research skills, but seeing themselves using those in an environment beyond academia. It's helpful to bring out that word research. That is what you are engaged in often. I wonder if I can ask you quite a difficult question, Aziza, which is around what your career path looks like. So you've told us a little bit about how you've got to where you are. Looking into the future is impossible, but are you able to say anything about what a career path can look like, or what you foresee your path looking like?
That's a good question. I think regardless of what route you take in terms of consulting, it does set you up for a lot of new opportunities. So if you wanted to stay in consulting, I could potentially stay in either a boutique consulting firm or maybe transition into management consulting. So within the boutique consulting path, it's quite clear cut. There are sort of different areas of progression, and you get to a point where, like you mentioned, you start off sort of as an analyst. They have different titles depending on the company. You might be called an associate in a different company, but that's where you're a bit more hands-on. You're doing the research there. You're generating your skills. That's a very good entry point for someone who's come out of university and isn't quite sure what they want to do, but it's a great way of developing those different skill sets. And then over time, you kind of transition upwards into more senior positions where you are a bit more client-facing. You are involved in the relationship side of things and managing the day-to-day projects. Within our company, we have further senior roles. So we have senior consultants and then engagement managers. Engagement managers are a lot more involved in business development. So they're more involved in bringing in new projects. There's a lot more client relationship building there because they're the ones who have to essentially maintain the accounts with those clients. And it's kind of it's a bit of a balance. They do a bit of project management, but they do a lot more sort of, you know, generating the revenue basically for the company. And then I think the highest level might be director before you get into the C-suite. So our company is kind of small, but probably about 60 people max. So the structure might vary in a different company, maybe in a bigger organization. What a lot of people do though in the life science consulting space is they do transition to pharma, so into industry itself. So working directly with clients, you get to see firsthand how they think, how they operate, and you do generate a lot of insight into the pharmaceutical industry and the subject matter expertise you might build through working on these projects. So for me, I've got a lot of, even though I did my project, my PhD in epilepsy, I actually haven't done any epilepsy projects since joining the company, but I've done a lot of oncology. I've done a lot of COVID-19, so both vaccines and therapeutics, and I've done a lot of sort of different neuro projects. So I still have a lot of different areas of knowledge that I've built up. So there is a little bit that element of, yes, I've researched this, I understand this space quite well now. So if you ask me what the next drug is going to be approved in, I don't know, DLBCL or some other lymphoma cancer, I can probably pop it out of my head in a second. But it's that kind of knowledge building that you get, and also the client exposure that really sets you up to go into industry. So if you wanted to go into industry, it's a potential transition, and I've seen lots of colleagues do that as well. I think moving to the other way to management consulting might be a bit different. There is potential maybe to go down sort of the knowledge team route. I think some management consulting firms do hire more experienced consultants who have maybe specific subject matter expertise, but really depends on what that firm is really interested in. Otherwise, I've seen some people who will make sort of like a lateral move, or maybe go back a step and start from, not necessarily from the associate level, but start a little bit earlier in the career run, and then go down the management consulting route, just because they want something a little bit different, but it's not too different and it's a complete career change. So a few exit strategies for me.
Progression strategies.
Progression, yes.
Great, thank you. And Umesh, having been in a large company like PwC and then been in a boutique, but now having been taken over again by back into the large setting of Accenture, have you got any things you'd like to say about career path and what it can be and what you hope yours might be?
Yeah, it's, as a consultant, I say, like, you've got plenty of opportunities to go into a variety of different things just because of the skill sets you pick up. Personally, myself, as kind of as Aziza was saying, in terms of a lot of the consulting companies, it's pretty linear. Like, you know, you can do your kind of years experience and gain up, and you can climb the ladder. So I've got colleagues that I've seen who were all the way from the grad all the way made up to partner, just stayed at the same company. And there are others who, you know, you can kind of, got a colleague who recently left from the consulting and they've gone into fintechs. There's like a range. You can go to fintechs, crypto, you can go into edutech, smart techs. There's the whole world of technology companies that would love consultants, especially in the startup world, just because of the skills that we have. You can also go into industry and kind of go towards in-house consulting. I mean, that depends on kind of when you leave the career path. So if you leave kind of the grade I'm at, probably kind of a more similar role, so more of a BA sort of role potentially is where you'd go into industry, whereas if you're a bit more senior, you can go kind of more into C-suite directly, things like that. So I think just there's a whole range of opportunities that we can go down. And I think it's also the size of the firm you want. Like, as you mentioned, I went from a large firm to a small firm and then kind of went back to a big firm without really expecting it. So I think there's pros and cons as well to smaller companies and bigger companies. Like, for example, some of the pros of the big companies are you've got a range of opportunities, more people you can meet, you know, there's travel opportunities. Smaller companies, there's less so of that, but then there's potentially more community feel, things like that as well. So it really varies and there's pros and cons to everything. But I'd say as a consultant, you've got a plenty exit or progression opportunities, whichever way you want to call it. So yeah, I'd say industry, smaller firms like boutique management consultancies, or industry are probably the three that you can go down, or just stay up and make it all the way to senior, make it a partner if you really want to do that as well.
Thank you. So still thinking about that, how you build your career, but from a slightly different perspective. Katherine, I was wondering, how important would you say networking or finding a mentor is when it comes not just to getting started in consultancy, but also your own career development once you're there?
I would say both are very important. I have had a few different mentors throughout my process of starting out my business and then all the way into running it. And I still have now a job coach, which has been invaluable because a lot of times when you're working for a smaller business or yourself, having someone that celebrates the wins with you, having someone to help you set up your priorities and your focuses, having someone to practice your elevator speech on or ask advice has been very, very helpful. So I really recommend getting a mentor or job coach. Also, I've been a mentor myself, which has been really interesting through my old university. And that was really helpful too, because you learn a lot through mentoring also and teaching and going through the experience with my mentee was a student. So that was really great. And then networking is good all the time. Always trying to find new relationships or clients, learning from other entrepreneurs. I joined a women's entrepreneur group when I moved to Boston, and I've been able to get a lot of relationships and tips and connections through that. And so I think that it's just really important to always be going to events, either virtual or in person, and getting your business out there and awareness, and especially when you're on your own, having that support is invaluable, I believe.
Thanks. And Lucas, what have you got any thoughts on that question of both networking and mentoring in terms of not only getting into the industry, but also your development as you go through?
Yeah, especially there's those two sides, right? Kind of like securing a job and then advancing in your role later on. And I think I kind of like to point out two things here. So when I'm trying to find a job, I often heard when I was in my bachelor's degree, well, you have to network. So I went to a lot of company events, and I don't know, I didn't feel like it gave me a lot from just talking to, like, I don't know, company representatives. So I would advise you to, like, I don't know, talk to your peers, like, who also attend those events. I feel like you learn a lot just from people who go through the same kind of process, even about the firms, that you're applying to. And it's really enjoyable to do interview preparation with your friends or friends of friends. It gives you back a lot, and also helps you develop crucial skills and make friendships. I mean, that's one of the things, and that is important. Or yeah, at least takes the whole like you have to network thing a bit off the I don't know, like kind of bad idea of it. And then when it comes to actually working, I think kind of same thing applies. It's kind of not so much to like network to progress in your role, but also, as Katie said, it's about like just making friends, and then through that kind of developing networks that you can help and that can help you in terms of need. And then one last thing about mentorship, definitely very helpful. I think probably the most helpful from like the kind of company interactions you can get. If you can get a mentor from like a firm or from your firm later on, it's really good to kind of ask those critical questions, which you're kind of afraid to ask, like in a more formal setting. And yeah, so also to those who are listening, like if there's anyone who would like to have a more informal chat or whatever later on, like just drop me a message and I'd be happy to help.
Thank you. And I was going to ask, going to go back to Katherine and say, like, you mentioned you had mentors, kind of how did you go about getting them?
Yeah, so a lot of times it was people that I had done like a project with or worked with in the past, and we really had a great relationship. And then I reached out later and said, would you mind meeting me for coffee? And then once I met, just seeing if they're interested in being my mentor. And then I also, for my job coach, it was recommended to me actually through my sister-in-law. So I think that there's just different ways that either through formal or through informal, just being able to talk and put out there like, hey, I'm looking for a mentor or a job coach. And it really is amazing how you never know where it's going to come from. And I think that's anything with consultancy is just a lot of it's just putting yourself out there and making those connections. And people are really willing to help. Just like Lucas nicely said, and I'm the same thing. If you want to message me later, I'm happy to answer any questions. So I think for the most part, people are really willing to help each other out.
Thank you. I suppose one thing to pick up on there is the word mentoring can have slightly different feel to it in different cultures and different countries. So just as consultancy is a complicated word that covers many things, mentoring too isn't a very precise word. So you can have mentoring schemes that are very formalized, but you can also just reach out to someone for their advice from time to time. It isn't necessarily a very formalized thing. But both of you have really demonstrated the principle that people give back. So at an early stage in your career or as a student, it can feel maybe a bit intimidating to reach out to people because you think you're just asking for people for help. But to remember that you would do the same for someone else, or to remember that you should do the same for someone else as you move a little further on. So you'll ask people for their advice now, someone else will ask you. It's circular, it's reciprocal, and that's why it's kind of okay to ask people, because you will respond for somebody else. So I'm conscious we've got quite a few questions, and in the Q&A that I'm going to try and race through. But before I do that, I'd love to hear from each of you one highlight from your career in consultancy that you would like to share. Perhaps I can go back to Aziza to start that, if I may.
I think that's a very difficult one. It's a very difficult one. Maybe a couple of highlights. I mean, we have a lot of internal opportunities within the company, and one of them was sort of, at least this was something I did last year, but putting together a white paper on COVID-19, particularly because it was, and it still is the hot topic of the space. So having the opportunity to put together a paper, publish that, and then presenting that as a webinar. And the great thing about that was we then sort of shared it with lots of different clients, and some people came back to us and were interested in working with us as a result. So it's a very indirect way of doing some business development, but it was great to see that there was a return on investment at the end of the day there. So that's a very small victory, I think. And I guess other highlights would be sort of being able to see my career progression over the years, and seeing that I'm getting to that stage as well, where the relationships I have with my clients, they're paying off, and I'm having clients reach out and say, we'd like to work with you on these projects, and helping to secure some big ticket revenue items for the company, which is great.
Thank you. Katherine, a highlight.
I would say one of my highlights is when I did a project with a placemaking startup that I worked for, Musicant Group and the city of Minneapolis. I was leading a project about doing a parklet, which you probably have seen many of those during the pandemic, which taking over parking spaces and turning them into patios, things like that. And the parklet ended up winning an award in the city. And when I went back recently, I actually saw the parklet and was amazed years later that it was still there. So just seeing the different varieties of projects that you can do and the impact they make for me to make places better is really meaningful. And to be able to work in something that I'm passionate about has been really, really helpful and invigorating to keep moving forward and be motivated.
Thank you. Lucas, a highlight.
Yep. One quick one. I love food, and we have tons of like, team dinners. That's always a highlight of my week in a small setting. But in terms of professionally, I'll probably say like things that you can see in, in the real world after you finish your project, as the other said. So I know we helped several kind of like robo advisors to like start up and develop their business. And then later on, my grandmother came back from her bank and they had like a sign about that, and she was asking me on that topic. And I was like, funny that you say that, like we kind of did that a year ago or so. So those are the things that you kind of like to see, that whatever you do kind of persists, not only after, like a short period of time.
Yes, it has a bit of an impact. And Umesh, finally.
Yeah, to be honest, on the impact point, I think it's just every project you do, there's some sort of final impact. So there's been a project where it's £100,000 of saving, helping internally, making it easier life for employees with systems. Those are probably like, because I can't go into obviously a lot of detail with these projects, but those are kind of the areas I'd say there's the impact that you leave behind. And then also there's just trust that you kind of gain from senior stakeholders that I receive now, that I can kind of, present, and they trust us to do the work, and without, having to really micromanage us or anything like that, I think is something I find quite grateful for. And being in a position where, I'm doing these types of talks as well, where I can actually help kind of the next generation, give advice, and that's, I think, quite big and quite impactful, I think. So I'd say those are probably the highlights so far in my career.
Thank you very much, all of you. Now, we've got quite a lot of questions in the chat. What I'm going to try and do is prioritize those that might have the most general interest to the audience, and then if I've got time, go to some of the slightly more specific ones. I think probably I'm not going to ask each of you to comment on each question, so maybe just unmute if you think, yeah, I'll give that one a go. But the first one I was going to ask about was to do with work-life balance, because that's come up a couple of times in the questions. Is it possible to have a healthy work-life balance, and what that work-life balance is? Now, I'm very conscious that's going to vary between you. It's even in what you've said so far. Katherine has talked about being able to do lots of other things. Lucas has indicated that there's a bit of time on the road. Thoughts on work-life balance? Thank you, Umesh.
Yeah, because compared to Lucas, I've got kind of a less travel, because in a way, I'm financial services, so my clients, I'm based in London, and my clients are all based in London, so they're in Bank, Canary Wharf for the most part. So work-life balance is pretty good. It varies depending on the project and the client, I'd say. So for me, at this point, it's once, maybe twice a week, but mostly once, because I prefer working from home, because I can work out in the morning and get things done around the house. So in terms of like actual timings, it's about 8:30 to 5, 9 to half 5 is probably what I kind of mostly do. And I think it's very easily manageable as long as you kind of manage your workload, organized, you can definitely get things done. There are the odd days here and there you might have to work a bit later, but for the most part, you definitely manage it, and the work-life balance is really good.
Thanks. Does anyone want to contradict or add to that?
Since I'm small and I have my own LLC, at times I have had like 6 projects that I'm managing through, like I said, the placemaking firm that I worked for. And then there's other times that I've taken less projects so that I could focus on art or other things that I'm pursuing on the side. So I feel like for me, it's been nice because it's allowed me to be more flexible and to be able to pursue other side hustles. So for someone that wants to try out different things and is a go-getter, I feel like consulting and starting your own LLC can be a nice opportunity for that.
Great, thank you. And I think, Lucas, were you going to say something as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. It boils down also a lot to what you want to do. I mean, definitely in a certain space, you can't just be like, well, I want to work 4 hours today. But it boils down to how much you also want to stand up for kind of taking your time to do other things, and then or whether you kind of build that tension on yourself to like be working really hard. So like when you start, especially like when you do internships and stuff, like people are nowadays in consulting don't expect you to work as hard anymore and to like be just only work focused. Like that's not at all the goal. And it's just like kind of vital that people know that and like take that kind of importance for themselves and like yeah, speak up when you feel like you're working too much.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So, if I can summarize slightly, there can be big pressures on work, but it is possible to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And part of that's down to you to make that happen for yourself. There'll be pressure points, obviously, there are in all jobs. There's another question that's had quite a lot of votes in the Q&A, which is a slightly complicated one, but to do with working for companies, because you're working with clients, particularly if you're in a big consultancy firm, you might have to work for clients. Perhaps you don't entirely agree with their activities. And someone's raised that, there was a book published about McKinsey and some of their consulting work. So the question is, if you come up against a kind of clash of what you might call moral values or belief system, if you come up against a potential clash of that with the work you're being asked to do, how do you navigate that?
I can go first. Yeah. So I say, in terms of, I've had a colleague like that because there were projects that, consultants do with like Shell, for example. And obviously people have, there's a big thing now, people have different opinions. There's also religious reasons people don't work with alcoholic beverage companies, for example. And I think, because how it works in consulting, there is a resourcer and there are those conversations that you have with them. So you can bring those types of topics up because everyone has their own interests and their own personal beliefs, and that's definitely taken into account. So if you strongly believe you don't want to do something, you definitely can raise that. And it's not, you're the only one in that company and you're the only person who can do it, and you're not forced to do it. So I think it's never a thing where you're going to be pushed to do it. You definitely push back and you can kind of follow what you want to believe in.
Thank you, that's helpful. And it comes up in all sorts of situations now. It's not only consultancy where people are up against those slightly thorny questions. So I'm going to ask something now. I'm going to roll a few questions together, which are to do with qualifications, certifications, and sort of how useful they are, but also why you might want to move on from them. So someone's asked Umesh about kind of how crucial your MSc in management was, but then alongside that, there's a question around professional certificates, so perhaps online leadership certificates from prestigious universities, but online things. So it partly goes into this thing of how do I get successful into getting into this, which is another bigger question, but in terms of qualifications or certifications, have you got any views? And maybe I can start with you, Umesh, having done the management MSc, but others could chip in too.
Yeah, personally, this is my personal opinion and how I feel. I think you should do a degree and a qualification if it's something you want to study and you want to develop yourself. I don't think it's something, so I didn't pick to do my MSc in order to get into consulting. I did it because it's something I wanted to kind of, the experience it gave me to make me a more rounded individual, because economics was my undergraduate. That's essentially the reason I picked it. And in terms of what I picked up from it is like, the friendships, the diverse ways of thinking, critical thinking, presenting, and those, and it built up my confidence, I'd say, of those types of aspects. I think, like I was saying previously, I think knowledge is something, you're always going to have to build, and it's always something you learn on the job. You're not going to start a grad scheme. You're not going to just know everything just because you've done a master's. You're going to be in the same position as someone who's done a bachelor's, or someone just come out fresh out of university. So fresh out of school, sorry. So I think it's down to your own reasoning, and obviously there's a whole cost to it as well, and none of these things aren't cheap. So I think it's down to your own personal situation and your own drive and what you want to develop and what you want to learn. I don't think you should be thinking of doing something in order to achieve something else. You should be just doing it to develop your own self, and then going from there and seeing what opportunities it brings you. Because for myself, I've done MSc, I've done like a Salesforce qualification, I've done the chartered banker through work, but it's those things I've done because I don't mind. I mean, I enjoy studying, and that's kind of what I want to develop, but don't take it as that's going to lead to this, in my opinion.
Thank you. And there have been a couple of questions around having taken that academic route first, so done a PhD. It's probably too long a question to start going in depth, Aziza, as to what made you go into consulting after a PhD. But do you have anything that you can add around the what does a PhD add? And someone's asked, like, is it actually a good idea to do a postdoc as well? Will that add more before you go into consulting? Or really is that not the point?
So it kind of ties back to what Umesh was saying about, at the end of the day, do what you enjoy. Don't do a PhD for the sake of it, because it's 3-4 years of grind. So it's not fun unless you enjoy it. So there's that to take into account. But in terms of whether or not it provides value, I think it does add quite a lot of significant value. I know in my company, if you have a PhD, you are hired at a step above than someone who might have a master's degree. So there is that advantage there. And we do value, I don't know if it's something that a lot of other boutiques do, but we do value advanced degrees significantly. So whether that's, you know, a master's degree, PhD, or MBA, that will have a sort of a payoff in terms of the experience that you get in the company. But I think also, like from what I've seen in industry, if you were thinking sort of big picture, a lot of industry jobs do ask for advanced degrees as well, especially in things like pharma, where they want a bit more specialization or a bit more technical knowledge about the different therapy areas. Of course, you're going to potentially get that through your career, but it does help give you like a potential advantage against other candidates, because at the end of the day, it's about standing out. How can you one up someone else? And unfortunately, I think the current state of the sort of employment industry is that we're at the stage where, you know, in the past you didn't need to have a bachelor's degree to get a good job, but now everyone has a bachelor's degree. So now, how do you stand out? You've got to do a master's degree. It's kind of depressing in a way, but it is the reality that when you're applying to these jobs, a lot of people will have very similar profiles to you. So it's about what you can do to make yourself stand out. If you choose not to go down the academic route, do think about the career, like the experiences that you might get, because experience is quite useful. So if you went and worked in industry, or you got a job that you do have significant transferable skills, try and make use of that as much as you can, because at the end of the day, experience is much more important than what certificate you have. So I think there's that to bear in mind. In terms of the question about doing a postdoc, if your plan is to stay in academia, then go ahead with postdoc. If you do want to transition into consulting, I would personally say don't do it. But that's from my own perspective. It's just because it doesn't add a huge amount of value to the consulting side of things. You know, of course, you do gain additional experience, and you become a bit more autonomous and stuff that you do, and a bit more independent as a postdoc. But in terms of like how a recruiter might look at it, they won't necessarily favor someone with a postdoc versus someone who's just fresh out of their PhD program. So if it's something that you're not sure about, have a think about it. Maybe talk to people who are in the space and who've done the same transition, just to get a bit of their insights. It is useful, and if it's something that you enjoy, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
Thank you. And I'm conscious we're right up against the end of time. There are a lot of questions still, but quite a few of them are questions I would encourage. If you're a current student, book a careers appointment to talk more to one of the careers consultants. If you're a research degree student or a postdoc, book with the researcher team. If you're a recent graduate, you can still book careers appointments. We can work with you for 3 years after you've graduated. So some of these questions about how do I get in, what are the steps to get into consultancy? How do I transition into it? Can I go into it if I'm not so sure on my communication skills? All of those things we can talk with you. And if you've got other questions, most of the panelists have very kindly said you can reach out to them. So do reach out to them, to other alumni who are in the consultancy field, and carry on the learning that you've been doing in this session.